Thank you.
Professor Koh Lian Pin, you can take your 2 cards together. 3 cards, sorry.
Madam Chair, the Singapore Green Plan 2030 includes several ongoing and new initiatives. One of these initiatives is City in Nature. The targets of City in Nature include doubling our annual tree planting rate, increasing the land area of our nature parks by over 50%, and adding 1,000 hectares of green spaces. These are ambitious and important targets for transforming Singapore into an even greener and more beautiful city by 2030. Can the Ministry share its plans for tracking progress towards achieving these targets over the next decade? Perhaps more importantly, what does success look like in terms of the outcomes of City in Nature for the public, private, and people sectors? Green spaces are important for the many benefits they provide to Singapore. These benefits may include conserving biodiversity, addressing climate change impacts, and improving the physical and mental health of our fellow Singaporeans. The success of City in Nature in delivering these outcomes hinges not just on the amount of additional green spaces that we set aside to meet our target, but also on the quality of these green spaces with respect to the different benefits we hope to derive from them. Green spaces are not all the same. In fact, our understanding of the different types and values of green spaces could be a matter for public consultation and discussion as part of the Green Plan conversations. The Green Plan conversations are a timely and constructive opportunity for the public, private, and people sectors to take a holistic approach in considering what should be part of Singapore's current natural resources and future natural heritage. These conversations are also an important opportunity for the public, private, and people sectors to communicate even more effectively with one another to strengthen our mutual trust and social compact as we manage the inevitable and growing tensions between economic development and nature conservation in Singapore. For example, perhaps the government could explain more plainly to the people why it cannot ease the demand for land, if that is indeed the case. Perhaps the nature community could explain more convincingly to the government why green spaces should be valued as our natural capital and national assets. And perhaps all of us could demonstrate that we can take a pragmatic, calibrated, and science-based approach to face our challenges, make hard decisions, and co-create solutions as a society. I think most Singaporeans do appreciate that there are multiple priorities, constraints, and trade-offs that need to be considered in making our urban planning decisions. On the other hand, as a biophilic or nature-loving society, many of us wish to hold on to every little piece of remaining greenery we understand to be relatively pristine. That is why the public, private, and people sectors may also benefit from having the bigger picture of what remains of our green spaces in Singapore to help frame our discussions and align our perspectives and priorities. To appreciate this bigger picture may require us to answer a few important questions, including, where are the green spaces that we must defend at all costs? Where are the necessary ecological buffers and corridors that we need to protect? What other green spaces are there in Singapore? Where are they located? And what are their marginal values for nature conservation? What more can we do by leveraging Singapore's natural capital to strengthen our ecological, climate, and socio-economic resilience? That is why I am excited by Minister Desmond Lee's recent announcement to engage the nature community in building a more comprehensive picture of Singapore's island-wide ecosystems and connectivity. and in understanding how specific sites connect to our nature cores, buffers, and corridors. The Ministry's plan to do this in a scientific and systematic manner is extremely important and a huge step forward for us to understand the value of green spaces in the broader context of Singapore's natural capital at the national scale. I am confident that this effort, to be led by our National Parks Board in partnership and consultation with our academic, nature, and community stakeholders, will produce invaluable perspectives, science, and tools to help inform Singapore's long-term planning decisions. The Green Plan conversations are therefore a vital and necessary platform for us to engage in open discussions, consultations, and communications to co-create an effective environmental management framework and set of processes for achieving the intended targets and outcomes of the City in Nature initiative and the Singapore Green Plan. By working together to consider the green spaces we have left, not in isolation, but in their totality, we can make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. With regards to the Kranji woodland incident, I am confident that ongoing investigations by the relevant agencies will identify any gaps or breaches that may have resulted in the premature land clearance. And upon the completion of those investigations, I am confident that the necessary deterrents and safeguards will be put in place to prevent it from ever happening again. Apart from the premature clearance at Kranji, I think there are other important issues that may be even more deserving of our attention. For example, what must we do to ensure the success of the ecological corridor that would run through the Agri-Food Innovation Park at Kranji in fulfilling its function of increasing ecological connectivity across Singapore? How can we do the same for the other ecological corridors on the island? How do we ensure that the environmental monitoring and management plan for Kranji will deliver its intended outcome of mitigating any ecological impact on Sungai Pangsua and neighboring habitats such as the Mandai, mangrove, and mudflat? Perhaps these questions need to be discussed in consultation with the nature and scientific communities. I'm also happy to learn that the Ministry will continue efforts to strengthen our Environmental Impact Assessment, or EIA, framework. EIAs are an essential part of good environmental governance, as they empower and enable the authorities to get the most complete information on a proposed development through rigorous scientific protocols and engagements with nature and community stakeholders. The recent announcement by Minister Desmond Lee to explore the potential of centralizing EIA processes is another significant and positive step. A centralized EIA approach could help reduce the risk of any conflict of interest, increase and maintain EIA standards, and eliminate any ad hoc and inconsistent practices. Perhaps another improvement for the Ministry to consider is to adopt a more precautionary approach in our EIA framework. At the moment, the Ministry and relevant agencies as technical experts shoulder the initial burden and responsibility of having to assess the likelihood of any environmental impact that may result from development and the need for any environmental studies and mitigation measures. Perhaps the initial burden should instead rest on the developer to always be required to show, prior to development, that there would not be impacts beyond acceptable thresholds. And if there would be potentially unavoidable impacts, to require the developer to put in place and demonstrate the adequacy of mitigation measures. I think this preliminary layer of information can add to the context-specific set of considerations that the Ministry and relevant agencies will have to act on as decision makers. Ultimately, a sound EIA framework helps to increase transparency in our urban planning decisions, encourage stakeholder participation, and ensure greater public support of development plans and mitigation measures at later stages. As we continue to discuss and debate the various ways to improve the EIA framework and other key ingredients of good environmental governance, we should not lose sight of the overarching goals and outcomes that the public, private, and people sectors all seek to achieve. I believe we all want to maintain public trust in the credibility and integrity of the processes by which we evaluate the different priorities and trade-offs of our society, so that we can make the most informed decisions on our natural capital for the benefit of the current and future generations of Singaporeans.